My name is Rachel, and on what should have been the happiest night of my life, I learned just how easily love can be revoked, especially when it threatens their legacy. What began as a joyful announcement at my parents' grand estate ended with my husband and me cast out, pregnant, homeless, and humiliated. But sometimes, losing everything means you're finally free to rebuild on your own terms. Stick with me. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about resilience, legacy, and how one woman reclaimed her voice, her home, and her future. Would you have done the same in my shoes? If you had told me that announcing my pregnancy would blow up my entire life, I would have laughed. That night at my parents' estate, I wore confidence like perfume. Everything felt right, until it didn't. Michael and I arrived at the Langford family home in Austin just before sunset. That place never failed to overwhelm me. High limestone arches, carefully manicured gardens, and a foyer echoing with wealth and silence. My father, Gerald Langford, made his fortune in real estate. My mother, Celeste, made sure we looked like we belonged in a catalog for Southern aristocracy. Michael, my husband of just under a year, greeted everyone with his usual gentle warmth. He's the kind of man who fixes the leaky faucet before you even notice it's dripping. Kind, grounded, real. And maybe that's why they've never approved of him. Too blue-collar, too plain. Not Claire's husband, Adam, the finance prodigy with perfectly tailored shirts and a $1,000,000 smile. Dinner was set up in the glass sunroom overlooking the garden. Candles glowed against crystal. A private chef floated in and out, serving small plates no one asked for but everyone pretended to enjoy. Clare, my sister, laughed too loudly at Adam's latest Wall Street anecdote. My father sipped his Bordeaux with the satisfied detachment of someone used to being obeyed. And then I spoke. "We're having a baby," I said, my voice barely shaking. Michael reached for my hand, beaming with that wide, open joy that made my chest ache with love. At first, silence, a clink of a fork falling onto a plate. Then my mother blinked and said, "Already?" My father's jaw clenched. "You're not serious." I felt the air shift. Claire's eyes darted toward our father as if gauging how disapproval might trickle down. "Of course we're serious," Michael said, still smiling. "Rachel's in her second trimester." I watched my father's face harden like cement setting. "And how exactly do you plan to support a child, Michael? Still hauling boxes at that warehouse?" "Dad," I began, but he cut me off. "You've made your choices. So have I," he stood. "The deed to the condo, yours no longer. It was a gift based on expectations. Clearly, those expectations meant nothing." The blood drained from my face. The downtown condo, our home. A wedding gift from my parents, gone. "You're evicting us," I whispered. Celeste looked away. Claire said nothing. Michael stood, calm but burning behind the eyes. "We'll leave." My father didn't even nod, as if we were employees being dismissed. We gathered our things in stunned silence. I remember Michael's hand on the small of my back, steadying me as we walked out the front door. And I remember thinking, this is how the fall begins, not with a scream, but with the click of a gate behind you and no key in your hand. We drove aimlessly for a while, past shuttered boutiques and neon-lit gas stations, down streets neither of us recognized. I couldn't look at Michael. I didn't trust my face not to crumble. We didn't speak, not really. He reached for my hand across the center console and held it the way people hold something breakable. Finally, we pulled into the parking lot of a roadside diner just off the highway, one of those old-school places with buzzing signs and sticky booths. I sat down on the faded vinyl, belly tight with nausea that had nothing to do with the pregnancy. Michael ordered pancakes because he didn't know what else to do. I ordered nothing. I wasn't hungry. I was unraveling. He kept glancing at me like he was waiting for a reaction. Rage, tears, anything. But I couldn't offer him that yet. I was still back in that sunroom, watching my father sip wine as if nothing had happened. The waitress left us alone. Bless her heart. That's when my phone rang. Blocked number. I almost didn't answer. I was afraid it would be my mother calling to clean up the mess with her usual hollow sympathy, but I picked up anyway. "Rachel." It was her voice, gruff, unmistakable. "Grandma." My voice cracked, surprise loosening something in my chest. "Lorraine, yes, don't say anything. I heard what happened." "How?" "They talk loud when they think you're not listening," she said. "Your mother called to gloat, said you'd made your bed. Funny, coming from a woman who's never made one herself." Michael looked over, confused. I mouthed Lorraine. That name still carried weight. My grandmother, my father's mother, lived alone out in Fredericksburg on an old ranch that smelled like cedar and black coffee. We hadn't visited in over a year, but I remembered everything. The way she always wore denim like armor. Her hands calloused from a life my parents had scrubbed out of their history. "Where are you?" she asked. We don't know yet. You will now come here. To your place. I've got an extra bedroom and I'm not using the second bathroom for anything but spider nests. You'll be safer here than anywhere else. And don't you worry about the mess. Every woman in this family deserves a fresh start at least once. I choked out a laugh, the first real sound from me since the estate. Are you sure? You think I'd say it if I wasn't? And then she paused, her voice softening. They don't know what they've lost, Rachel, but I do. I hung up and stared at the table for a moment, trying to swallow the knot of emotion in my throat. She wants us to come, I finally said to Michael. Lorraine, he asked. I nodded. He didn't hesitate. Then we go. It was a long drive, nearly 2 hours west through Texas darkness. The radio was low, the only light coming from dashboard glow and the occasional blinking sign off the highway. Somewhere along the way, I felt my hand rest on my belly, half conscious, protective. When we pulled into Lorraine's ranch, it was almost midnight. The porch light was on. The house looked smaller than I remembered, but sturdier, like it had been waiting all this time without aging a day. She opened the door before we could knock. Don't just stand there like orphans, she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled like lavender and wood smoke. Get inside. Michael followed, his shoulders finally dropping. The house creaked with familiar comfort, walls lined with old photographs, some so faded the people looked like ghosts. There was a fire already lit in the hearth. The kindling snapped and stacked like she'd been expecting company. I sat on the old couch while she brought us tea in chipped mugs. Michael offered to help, but she waved him off. You're a guest tonight. Tomorrow you earn your keep. I laughed, actually laughed, and then cried, quietly into my hands. Lorraine didn't ask why. She just said, I've got stories to tell, but not tonight. Tonight you sleep. Tomorrow we plant roots. Michael and I were asleep in that small back bedroom before the fire even died. I don't remember the dreams I had that night, only that I woke up feeling, for the first time in weeks, like I was somewhere I belonged. The morning air on Lorraine's ranch smelled like dust, cinnamon, and the faint memory of rain. I woke to the chirp of birds and the creak of floorboards as Lorraine moved about the kitchen, humming some tune from another time. Michael was still asleep, one arm draped across the pillow where my stomach used to be. I slid out of bed, pulled on a sweater, and followed the smell of fresh coffee. She was already sitting at the kitchen table, pouring herself a second cup. A plate of buttered toast sat untouched beside her. When she saw me, she didn't say good morning. She just looked me over slowly and said, You look like your mama when she's hiding something. I raised a brow. Not sure that's a compliment. She shrugged. Wasn't meant to be. Sit. I did. For a while, we sat in a silence that didn't need filling. She passed me a mug and I took a sip, too hot but perfect. This place, I said, glancing around the kitchen filled with floral curtains, yellowed recipe cards, and decades of life, feels like a time capsule. That's because it is. Lorraine leaned back in her chair. Every photo, every dent in the wall, it's all mine. You think your parents understand that kind of permanence? Gerald's never stayed in one house more than 10 years, always chasing the next best version of himself. I thought of the estate, of the marble floors that echoed and the chandelier that looked like it cost more than Michael's entire salary. I thought of the coldness in my mother's voice when she asked already, as though a baby was a scandal, not a blessing. What did they say about Michael? I asked suddenly. Back when we first got married. Lorraine took another sip. You want the cleaned-up version or the truth? The truth. She didn't hesitate. Celeste said you were slumming it. Gerald said you'd grow out of it. Claire smiled and called him steady, which is code for beneath her. My stomach clenched. I'd suspected as much, but hearing it out loud, it changed something. It made the past few years feel like a slow-motion betrayal. They never even tried to get to know him, I whispered. Because they already decided who you were supposed to be. Lorraine leaned forward. Rachel, I've known since you were 10 years old that you'd never fit their mold. You had fire. You just didn't know what to do with it yet. Tears stung the back of my eyes. I tried to be what they wanted. I know you did, and now look where that got you. We sat there, the truth spreading between us like a spill on the table. Later that day, Michael and I walked through the property. The barn was half collapsed on one side, but the fences were strong, and the soil under our feet felt solid. There was history here more than just family stories. There was memory. In the old attic, we found boxes of photographs, yellowed newspaper clippings, and baby clothes wrapped in tissue. I sat cross-legged on the floor, holding a faded picture of my father as a boy standing beside a younger Lorraine. He looked so open, so unformed, nothing like the man who'd snatched our home away with a sneer. Michael sat beside me, brushing dust off a silver frame. "This place feels like it remembers you." "Maybe it does." I ran my fingers along a wooden crib, chipped but sturdy. "I used to sleep in this." His hand found mine. "We could fix it up." The thought wrapped around me like a blanket, hopeful, fragile. That night, as Lorraine fried chicken and Michael chopped wood outside, I wandered the hallway and studied every photograph on the walls. Weddings, babies, summer picnics with lemonade and gingham tablecloths. I stopped at one in particular, my own wedding photo. I hadn't even known she had it. It was slightly tilted, as if hung in haste, but with affection. "She came," Lorraine said from behind me. I turned. "Claire, your mother. She showed up the morning after the wedding with a box of leftover roses and a speech about disappointment. I told her to leave them at the door and take her judgment back with her." I laughed softly. "That sounds about right." Lorraine placed a hand on my shoulder. "You're not alone, Rachel. Whatever your parents think they've taken, they've only freed you to start something real." That night, lying beside Michael under a quilt Lorraine had sewn when I was a baby, I whispered, "Do you think we're going to be okay?" He kissed my forehead. "We already are." And somehow I believed him. It was the first truly warm afternoon since we arrived, spring creeping in like a secret. Lorraine had taken her sweet time warming up to Michael's help, but today she handed him the barn keys and said, "If you're going to play handyman, you might as well start where the roof's already half in heaven." He grinned and took it as a challenge. I stayed behind in the kitchen, organizing the pantry while Lorraine brewed her bitter tea and rummaged through an old wooden filing cabinet she'd wheeled in from the hallway. It groaned like it hadn't been touched since the 90s. "I've got something for you," she said, placing a manila envelope on the table like it was radioactive. I turned, wiping flour from my hands. "What is it?" "Proof." I sat, slowly. She lit a cigarette, something she'd only done 3 times in my presence, and every time was a prelude to truth that cut. "You remember your wedding?" she asked. "Of course." "You remember who paid for it?" I frowned. "My parents. At least that's what they made sure everyone believed." I didn't speak. The memories flashed. The guest list Celeste micromanaged, the Tux rentals Gerald insisted on handling, the way they passed out champagne like they were buying loyalty. Lorraine pushed the envelope toward me. 12,000, wired directly from me. "I told Gerald and Celeste it was for your dress, flowers, and part of the venue, wanted it to come from me." I opened the envelope and pulled out the printed wire transfer receipt, dated 3 weeks before the wedding, signed by Lorraine Langford. "Memo for Rachel's future." I stared at it. My fingers went cold. "They said it was their gift," I whispered. "I know." I blinked hard. "Why didn't you say anything then?" Her eyes met mine, calm but edged with fire. "Because you still needed to believe they loved you for who you were, not who they thought you should become." My stomach turned. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about control, ownership. My parents had presented themselves as the generous benefactors of my wedding when in truth, they'd taken credit for love that wasn't theirs to give. "I don't understand," I said. "Why would they lie about something like that?" "Because illusions are cheaper than integrity, and your parents, especially Gerald, never paid full price for anything unless it bought them influence." The words sliced clean. I thought back to every time my father reminded me of that condo, how he framed it like a reward but wielded it like a leash. How he always made Michael feel like a +1 to his daughter's life, instead of an equal partner. I thought of Claire's perfect wedding at the Four Seasons, paid in full and proudly posted about by both parents for months, and how, despite everything, I'd accepted a half-truth dressed up as generosity and thanked them for it. I stood, the floor shifting beneath me. "I need air," I muttered. Lorraine didn't stop me. I stepped out onto the porch and sat on the old swing, my legs trembling. The field stretched out before me, quiet and unbothered by human betrayal. Michael was in the distance, sleeves rolled up, hammering something back into place. He looked up and waved. I couldn't wave back. I couldn't stop thinking, if they lied about this, what else had they twisted? What other pieces of my life were built on fictions they wrote and signed in someone else's name? When Michael finally joined me on the porch, I was still holding the receipt. He sat beside me and waited. "They didn't pay for the wedding," I said flatly. "Lorraine did. They just took the credit." He didn't speak at first. "Then that makes sense." I turned to him, startled. I always wondered how people so emotionally stingy could be so financially generous. His voice wasn't cruel, it was measured, the way someone speaks when the truth no longer hurts because the wound is already scarred over. I leaned into him, pressing my cheek against his shoulder. "They've been scripting our life," I whispered, and I just kept reading my lines. "Well," he said, gently taking the receipt from my hand, "maybe it's time you wrote something of your own." That night, after Michael went to bed, I stayed up at the kitchen table. I opened my old journal, the one I hadn't touched since we moved into the condo, and on the first fresh page I wrote, "Start here, they lied, not just once but often. This is what happened, step by step." And I didn't stop. It's funny how quickly a rhythm finds you, even in a place where everything was supposed to feel temporary. By the second week, our days had shape. Michael was waking at dawn for shifts at the logistics warehouse in town. He'd managed to snag full-time hours almost immediately, grueling work, but he said it made him feel like he was building something again. "Even if it's just pallets and paychecks," he'd joke. I didn't laugh the first time, but later I did. My mornings started slower. The baby, barely the size of a grapefruit according to my pregnancy app, was making sure I stayed hungry and exhausted. Lorraine would slide a bowl of oatmeal toward me with a muttered, "Not glamorous, but it sticks," then shuffle out to feed the chickens or harass the neighbor who let his cows graze too close to her fence. And when the nausea passed, I found myself in the kitchen too, cooking, cleaning, folding laundry that smelled like wild air and old soap. It felt good. I hadn't realized how much of my life in the condo had been staged. White marble countertops I was afraid to scratch, rooms too perfect to use, days too quiet to live in. Here, everything had use. Everything had memory. The cabinet doors stuck, but they stuck because generations of hands had opened them. One afternoon, I asked Lorraine if I could help with the barn. She looked me up and down like I'd grown an extra nose. "You ever cleaned out a hayloft?" she asked. "No. Know the difference between raccoon scat and mouse droppings?" "Not yet," she grunted. "Wear boots." So I did. We spent the entire day clearing out decades of dust, rusted tools, old feed bags, and one very territorial possum. Lorraine didn't believe in breaks, but she did believe in storytelling. As we worked, she told me about my grandfather, how he'd built this barn with his bare hands after returning from the war, about how she'd stitched feed sacks into curtains when money was tight, and how the land always gave back if you gave first. At one point I asked, "Did you love him?" She didn't answer right away, just swept up a pile of nails and muttered, "Love's in the doing, not the saying." That night, I found a set of old baby cribs stored beneath a tarp near the back of the barn. One was splintered, beyond repair, but the other white, carved, and sturdy, just needed paint and new screws. I dragged it inside. Michael spotted it when he came home, his face lighting up in a way that made my heart ache. "That yours?" he asked, running his hand along the railing. "Lorraine thinks it was Claire's," I said, "but I want to make it ours." So we did. We spent the next few evenings sanding it down, repainting it a soft gray blue. Lorraine brought us a can of her sacred stash, paint brushes, and declared we were doing it wrong, then sat nearby reading old issues of Southern Living while occasionally correcting our technique. We laughed, we joked about names. Michael wanted something timeless, Evelyn or Thomas. I floated me after Lorraine. He raised an eyebrow. She'd deny it's hers. "I know," I said, smiling. "That's why I like it." In those small, paint-streaked moments, something shifted inside me. The bitterness was still there, yes, but it had begun to dilute, not disappear, not yet. But it wasn't drowning me anymore. Instead, I felt something else blooming, a fragile, stubborn hope. One morning, while folding linens in the guest room, I caught my reflection in the mirror, face flushed, hair wild from the wind, a smear of flour still on my cheek from breakfast. And I thought, she looks like someone who's healing. Not healed, not yet, but healing. The kind of woman who could raise a child on her own terms. The kind of woman who, despite being abandoned by her own parents, was becoming a mother who would never make her child feel less than. That night, before bed, I sat down again with my journal. I flipped to the next page beneath my entry about the wedding money lie, and I wrote, "Today, we laughed while painting a crib someone else discarded. Maybe that's what healing is, finding use in what others throw away." The call came late. Later than anyone decent should dial a pregnant woman who wakes up 3 times a night to pee. I saw Claire's name flash on the screen, and for a second I almost let it go to voicemail. But something in me said, "Answer." Her voice was quiet, tighter than usual. "Hey, It had been months since I'd heard it. Claire, my older sister by only 2 years, but miles ahead in every parent-sanctioned category: prestige, polish, perfection. She'd been Celeste and Gerald's trophy long before they ever started treating me like the unwanted consolation prize. Claire! I sat up straighter on the edge of the bed. Michael was still asleep, his hand curled over where my stomach had been. Yeah, sorry if I woke you. You did, it's okay. Silence, I could hear her breathing, could practically feel her hand clenching and unclenching around whatever perfectly lacquered wine glass she was probably holding. I heard about the baby, she said finally. I blinked. And another pause, then softly, so softly I almost missed it. I envy you. The words landed like a wrong note in a familiar song. What? I envy you, she repeated, slower this time, like she wanted to taste it and hate herself for it. You and Michael, the ranch, Lorraine. Claire, what's going on? But she didn't answer, just an exhale, a shaky one. I think I just needed to say that. I held the phone tighter. Do Mom and Dad know you're calling? She laughed. It wasn't a pretty laugh, it was jagged, hollow. They don't know a lot of things, especially about me. The weight of those words pressed down on the room. I didn't know what to say. Claire and I had never been close, never really fought, but never confided either. Our relationship was a tightrope of politeness stretched over a canyon of unspoken resentment. Are you okay? I asked, finally. More silence. Then the sound of a breath caught, like she was swallowing something down. I should go, she said quickly. Claire, wait. But the line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long time after that. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to dismiss it as some late-night guilt trip or vague sibling nostalgia. But there was something in her voice, something tired, worn down. Like maybe I wasn't the only one who'd been living under our parents' grip, just the only one who finally broke free. The next morning, I told Lorraine about the call over tea. She didn't react right away, just stirred her mug with that small silver spoon she always used, the one shaped like a leaf. She called you, she asked. Yeah, Lorraine snorted. Little Miss Ice Queen finally thawing out. I smiled, but it didn't last. She said she envies me. Lorraine sipped. Of course she does. You don't even know her. I know people, she replied, and I know what regret sounds like. I looked out the window. The sun was just rising over the field, catching on the old swing set near the tree line, rusted, forgotten. She didn't apologize, I said quietly. She's not ready, Lorraine answered. But envy, that's a start. Later that day, I went out to the barn to find Michael. He was fixing the latch on the feed door, humming some old Eagles song. I watched him for a moment before stepping inside. Claire called. He stopped mid-hammer, turned. She okay? I don't know, I said honestly, but she's not who I thought she was. Michael didn't press, just nodded and said, you two always seemed like strangers in the same house. I laughed once. We were. I didn't know what to make of the call, I still don't. But for the rest of that day, it followed me like a shadow, not heavy, just there, lingering. That night, I dreamed about our childhood. Claire and I building forts out of blankets in the living room before our mother would sweep in and tell us to tidy up, guests might see. I remembered Claire slipping me cookies when she thought no one was watching. I remembered her whispering once, "Don't let them change you," before she let them change her instead. The next morning, I wrote again in my journal. Last night, a woman I used to call my sister whispered envy like a confession. Maybe the cracks are showing. Maybe we all lived in the same illusion and just didn't know it. Hope has a strange way of sneaking back in, not with fanfare, but in everyday things, like pancakes on a Sunday morning, or laughter over paint splattered baby onesies hung to dry on a makeshift line behind the barn. Michael's hands were rougher now, his tan deeper. He came home each night exhausted but smiling. I think that's what real love looks like, not grand gestures, but the quiet commitment to show up every day even when the world has turned its back on you. He got a bonus last week. A real one. After 6 weeks of long-haul logistics and double shifts, his supervisor handed him an envelope and said, "You've earned this." Michael came home beaming, holding it like a treasure. "Don't open it yet," he told me. "Come with me." We got in the truck and drove into town, where he led me to a small baby boutique tucked between a hardware store and a bakery that always smelled like cinnamon and thyme. Inside, he pointed to a pram displayed near the window. Pale gray, sleek, but not flashy. The kind of thing you keep for years, maybe even passed down. He paid in cash. The clerk offered to carry it out to the truck, but Michael waved him off. I got it. As we drove back, I watched him from the passenger seat. One hand on the wheel, the other occasionally reaching over to touch mine, as if he still couldn't believe we'd made it this far. When we pulled into the driveway, Lorraine was on the porch, waving us in like she always did, even when we were only gone an hour. She looked tired. Not the usual tired, but something deeper. A slowness in her step. A pause before standing. But she smiled when she saw the pram. "Well, that's prettier than anything I ever had," she said, her voice dry as dust but warm underneath. "And sturdier, too. You could probably ride that thing down a hill and live to tell it." Michael grinned. "Want to test it? Don't tempt me." We brought it inside. Lorraine sat on the couch watching us unwrap the packaging like it was Christmas morning. "I still can't believe this is real," I said, running my hand over the handlebar. Michael kissed my cheek. "It's real, she's real." We didn't know if it was a girl yet, but we both kept saying she as if we did. I went to the kitchen to make tea. Lorraine insisted on staying in the living room, said her hip was acting up again. But 10 minutes later, I heard the sound. Not a crash, not a yell, just the dull, sick thud of something heavy meeting wood. I ran. She was on the floor beside the couch, one hand still clutching the edge of a cushion, the other curled into her chest. Her face had gone pale, ashen. "Michael!" He was already moving, dropping the pram's instruction manual and rushing to her side. I fumbled for the phone, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. Lorraine's eyes met mine, still sharp, still stubborn. "Don't make a fuss," she whispered. "You collapsed." "I tripped." "You didn't trip." The dispatcher was asking questions I could barely answer. My voice cracked as I gave them the address. "My grandmother, she collapsed. No, she's conscious, but please hurry." We waited on the porch. Michael cradled her head. I sat beside them, stroking her arm, murmuring that help was coming, that it was going to be okay. But I knew, some part of me already knew. When the ambulance pulled up, the paramedics moved quickly. Lorraine protested every step of the way. "You'd think I was dying," she muttered as they strapped her to the gurney. "Not funny," I whispered, tears slipping down my cheek. She looked at me, her hand briefly finding mine. "It's just a hiccup." But the way her eyes softened told me it wasn't. At the hospital, they ran tests. Too many. They spoke in clipped tones outside the curtain. Michael stood like a sentinel by my side, but even he couldn't hide the tension in his jaw. The doctor came in late, carrying a chart and a face carefully arranged not to panic. But I felt it in my bones before he even spoke. He used words like advanced and unresponsive and months, not years. Lorraine had cancer. Not the kind you fight with hope and casseroles. The kind you watch. The kind that slips in and takes its time until time is all you wish you had more of. I sat at her bedside after they left. She was half asleep, her breathing shallow. Michael rested his hand on my shoulder. I wanted to scream, to demand the universe rewind the day, take back the pram, take back the moment we were finally happy. But I didn't. I just took Lorraine's hand and stayed. That night I didn't write in my journal. I couldn't. Because there are some truths that ink isn't strong enough to carry. Hospitals have a particular silence, clinical, steady, the kind that never quite lets you breathe. Lorraine hated it. I knew before she even said a word. The second morning, she looked at me with narrowed eyes and muttered, "If you let them keep me here just to die under fluorescent lights, I'll haunt you, and not in the charming way." I smiled barely. "You're not dying." She raised a brow. "I've lived long enough to know the smell of endings." There was no cure. The cancer had started in her bones and traveled like a whisper through every organ. They offered treatments to prolong, maybe slow, but not to reverse. Lorraine refused every one of them. "I'm not afraid of dying," she said. "I'm afraid of leaving things unfinished." We brought her home that week. Hospice arranged a hospital bed in the living room, the one that caught the best morning light. Michael and I took shifts, though Lorraine insisted we go back to doing normal things, as if anything could be normal again. There's a strange grace in slow loss. You begin to memorize everything. The cadence of her voice, the way she liked her tea with exactly half a sugar cube, how she hummed Patsy Cline when she was too tired to speak. The way she would watch me when she thought I wasn't looking, her eyes already saying goodbye. Some nights I sat beside her and read. Old recipes, weathered letters. One evening she asked for her wedding ring. Michael helped me search the tiny safe in her bedroom. "It's not valuable," she'd warned, "but it's mine." The ring was plain, gold, barely worn, etched inside with the words "still choosing you." I slipped it onto her frail hand. She smiled. That man was infuriating, but he loved me right. I didn't ask her for marriage advice. I didn't need to. She gave it to me anyway. People think love is about always agreeing. It's not. It's about staying, especially when it's easier to leave. The bills piled up faster than I imagined. Every savings we had tucked away went toward comfort. A private nurse for the nights, medicine not covered by Lorraine's old insurance, travel back and forth to the clinic when her pain spiked. Michael never complained. He picked up extra shifts, came home sore, eyes red, but always kissed my forehead like it was enough payment for the day. "Promise me something," Lorraine whispered one morning, her voice barely above the rustle of bedsheets. "Anything. When the time comes, don't let them come back in and take what they threw away." I blinked. "Who?" "You know who. My parents." She squeezed my hand, weak but firm. "They'll want pieces. Guilt breeds entitlement. Don't let them touch what they didn't nurture." "I won't," I whispered. She didn't say anything after that for a long while. Just stared out the window where a breeze moved the curtains like breath. The end came quietly 2 weeks later. I was holding her hand. Michael stood behind me, one arm wrapped around my shoulders, the other across my swollen belly. Lorraine's chest rose, then stilled and didn't rise again. No drama, no final gasp, just peace. She was 87. After the nurse confirmed it, I sat by the bed for hours. I wasn't ready to let go of her warmth, her scent, the presence that had held us together when everything else fell apart. Michael made the calls, arranged the cremation per her wishes. No funeral, she'd insisted. "Just scatter me somewhere I can keep an eye on y'all." The will was read 3 days later in the dining room. Her lawyer was an old friend named Martha who wore oversized glasses and smelled like peppermint. When she opened the folder, she looked at us with a small, sad smile. "She left everything to you. The ranch, the house, what little money she had in savings, even her truck." Michael's brow lifted. "Are you serious?" "She was very clear," Martha said. "No conditions, no strings." She handed me a note, handwritten in Lorraine's familiar script. "Rachel and Michael, you've already earned this. Not with titles, not with blood, but with love. Build something here. And when your daughter grows up, tell her I wasn't always this cranky. Love, I broke then. Really broke." I sobbed until I couldn't see, until the paper in my hands was damp and wrinkled and real. Michael held me like he was holding both of us, me and the woman who'd just left us behind. Later that evening, I sat on the porch where Lorraine always watched the sunset. I read the letter again and again. Then I opened my journal. She gave us more than a home. She gave us permission to stay, to live fully without apology. And that is legacy. Grief doesn't hit you in a single blow. It's slower, Sly. It seeps into the in-between moments. The quiet after the dishes are done, the empty chair by the window, the missing sound of a teacup clinked too hard on its saucer. We buried Lorraine quietly. Or rather, we scattered her ashes along the east ridge of the property, where the cedar trees thickened and the air always smelled like stories. Just me, Michael, and a small wind that seemed to rise only for her. I said nothing while we did it. No speeches. Just a whisper of her name as my hands let her go. For the first few days after, I kept expecting to hear her voice in the hallway. Not a ghost, just that part of her that lived in the floors, the curtains, the sound of screen doors slamming too hard. But the house was still. And then the knock came, mid-morning. I was folding baby blankets on the couch, feet swollen and belly pressing against the edge of the table. Michael opened the door before I could move, and there they were, my parents. Gerald wore his usual power suit, the kind that looked absurd against the backdrop of peeling porch paint and flower pots shaped like chickens. Celeste, of course, came dressed like she was auditioning for an old money grief gala, black silk blouse, oversized sunglasses, not a single strand of hair out of place. I stood, not out of respect, out of instinct. "Rachel," my mother said, as if her voice still had weight here. I said nothing. "We came," she continued, "to discuss the estate." Michael's hand moved slightly closer to mine. I felt his pulse. "It's not your estate," I said finally. My father stepped forward. "Lorraine was our mother, her property, her assets belonged to this family." "She was your mother," I corrected, "and she chose who to give her legacy to." Michael cleared his throat. "The will was reviewed by her lawyer. It's airtight." Celeste scoffed. "Surely you don't expect us to believe Lorraine left everything to you two out of pure goodwill." "She did," I said. "Because we were there, not just in the end, but always." My father's face twisted. "You don't understand what's at stake here, Rachel. That land has value." "Exactly," I said. "And she knew we'd protect it, not sell it to developers the first chance we got." He flinched. "Because that's what it was about. It always had been control, image, assets." "We deserve part of this," Celeste said, stepping closer now. "Do you know how much we spent on your wedding, on that condo?" "No," I said. "You didn't spend a cent on the wedding. Lorraine did. I have the receipt." Celeste froze. You took the money, I continued, and told everyone it was from you. I believed it until I didn't, until I found the truth and started writing it down. Michael moved beside me, jaw set. And that condo, I added. It was never a gift, it was leverage. The second we made a choice you didn't approve of, you pulled it away like a reward we failed to earn. You're being cruel, my mother whispered. We just want what's fair. I stared at her, really stared. And I realized for the first time how small she looked. Not weak, not broken, just ordinary. A woman so desperate to maintain her place on a throne she never built, she couldn't see the foundation had already crumbled. No, I said. You want what makes you feel powerful, but you're not in charge here anymore. Michael stepped forward, holding out an envelope. Our lawyer has copies of the will, Lorraine's medical directives, and the land survey. Everything's accounted for. You have no legal claim. My father didn't take the envelope. My mother did. Her hand trembled as she held it. You think this makes you better than us? She snapped, voice cracking. Some quaint little family in the countryside with your baby and your barn and your old woman's stories. No, I said. It doesn't make us better, it just makes us free. They left without another word. No hugs, no final pleas. And when the truck pulled away, Michael and I stood on the porch, holding hands, listening to the gravel crunch under their tires as it carried them back to whatever world they thought they ruled. Later that night, I opened my journal. Today they came for what they threw away, but this land is not a reward, it's a vow. And they'll never touch what they tried to shame out of me. After they left, silence settled over the house like a warm blanket. Not emptiness, relief. Michael and I didn't speak for a while. We just sat on the porch swing, letting the late afternoon sun pour over us. The pram sat parked just inside the door, untouched since Lorraine's fall. But I kept glancing at it like a reminder that time only moves one direction now. Forward. We were nearing the due date. Every kick from the baby reminded me of that. Tiny, urgent nudges from someone who didn't yet know what kind of world she'd be born into. But I was starting to hope she'd find it gentler than the one I came from. The letter from Martha came the next morning. Not just confirming the will again, but enclosing a handwritten edition Lorraine had left with her lawyer, dated only 2 weeks before she passed. An addendum. Rachel, if they come for it, don't waver. If they shame you, don't answer. If they cry, let them. But don't give back what you've earned. This home knew your name before you did. Let her be yours. Love them if you want, but never at the cost of yourself again. I didn't cry, not then. But when I tucked the letter into the back of my journal, something inside me finally exhaled, like the last knot had untied itself. A few days later, I stood in the nursery, our nursery. The crib we'd repainted sat ready. Soft blankets, most second-hand, had been washed 3 times over and folded with the kind of reverence usually reserved for heirlooms. There was a small rocker in the corner, and a shelf with books I'd saved from my own childhood, Harold and the Purple Crayon, Miss Rumphius, The Snowy Day. And on the windowsill, framed in a simple piece of barnwood, was a photo of Lorraine, younger than I ever knew her, smiling in front of the house, a baby on her hip. My father, maybe, or an uncle I'd never met. Below it, I had etched a quote in careful black ink, "Build what they tried to erase." That night, Michael came home carrying something wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" I asked. He shrugged. "Something I saw at the antique store, felt right." I peeled it open. It was a quilt hand-stitched, pale blue and ivory with stars along the border and a sun in the center. Embroidered in delicate thread was a single word, Lorraine. I didn't have to ask if he knew. He always knew. We laid it in the crib together. The next morning, the doorbell rang again. Not my parents. Clare. She stood on the porch in jeans and a sweater, hair pulled back, no makeup. Not the Clare I remembered or the Clare she pretended to be. "Hi," she said, eyes red-rimmed. Can I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside. She didn't make excuses, didn't offer half-hearted explanations. "I saw the article in the paper," she said. "About Lorraine's passing, about the land." I nodded. "I wanted to say something before the baby comes, not because I expect forgiveness, just because I owe it." I let her speak. She told me about the pressure, about being the golden daughter, the silence she learned to live with, the things she let them take from me because it meant they didn't take from her. And then she said something I wasn't ready for. "I knew about the wedding money." I stared. "They told me, after, said it was better for the family if we kept it quiet. I didn't agree, but I didn't stop it either. I'm sorry." My throat tightened. "Why now?" "Because you still have your voice," she said. "And I don't want to lose mine before I find it." She looked around the living room. "This place is beautiful and it's yours. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." When she left, I didn't hug her, but I didn't ask her to leave either. Sometimes healing isn't a reunion. Sometimes it's just an honest moment at the door. That night, I sat at Lorraine's old desk and opened my journal again. They came for the land, for legacy, for power. But what they didn't know, what they'll never know, is that love doesn't come with conditions. Only freedom does, and we're free now. The birth came in the early hours of a quiet spring morning. No drama, no sirens, just a deep ache that built slow and steady until Michael grabbed the hospital bag and whispered, "It's time." Labor felt like moving through a storm underwater. Nothing existed but breath, pain, breath again. And then, suddenly, everything did. Our daughter arrived just after dawn. The nurse handed her to me, bundled and perfect. Her skin was soft pink, her eyes dark and blinking at a world too bright. I named her Lorraine. Not because I wanted her to carry the weight of the past, but because I wanted her to know the strength of it. The woman who raised me in the end, who taught me what family really meant. Michael cried when he held her. I didn't not right away. I was too full of everything we had lost and everything we had become. The nurses brought flowers, cards from neighbors. Even Martha, the lawyer, sent a note, but nothing from my parents until 3 days later. I was rocking Lorraine on the front porch. The air was crisp, the sky the kind of blue that only Texas knows. Michael was working on the fence line. I heard the gravel before I saw the car, a black sedan. They stepped out together, Gerald, Celeste. My mother wore a powder blue scarf. My father, no tie this time, just a button-down shirt, sleeves rolled. He looked older, smaller. They approached the porch with careful steps. Michael stepped out of the barn before I could rise. He met them halfway, his shoulders squared, stance quiet but unmovable. "Rachel's resting," he said. "She's on the porch," my father replied, pointing. "We just want to meet the baby." Michael shook his head. "Now's not the time." "We're family," Celeste insisted, her voice breaking for the first time I could remember. "You had the chance to be," Michael said softly. "You chose not to be." Then he turned back toward me. I didn't move, just watched from behind the screen door. My father's face crumpled. He took one step forward, then stopped. The weight of years of choices etched across his jaw. "I'm sorry," he said, not loud, not performative, just real. "I know you won't let us in, I understand that now, but I need you to know I was wrong." Celeste stood beside him, silent. Her chin trembled, but she didn't speak. Michael didn't respond. He just stood there, guarding the space between us. And for once, they didn't push. They turned, got back in the car, and left. I stayed there, rocking my daughter, listening to the engine fade into the distance. And then I breathed, not because it was over, but because something had finally settled. They could ask, they could knock, but I didn't owe them entry. That night, after Michael kissed Lorraine goodnight and dimmed the nursery light, I sat with my journal, one last time. I flipped to the final page and wrote, "Forgiveness is a door I decide when to open. And today I didn't, not because I'm bitter, but because I'm whole." I closed the journal, put it away, and walked into my daughter's room where the future, mine, ours, was fast asleep beneath a quilt stitched with stars and strength.